All right, and welcome back to the Black Psychologist Podcast, episode 3. Appreciate everybody listening and watching. Um, we have here myself, Dr. Kyle Osborne, your host and clinician. But of course, I'm not here by myself. I'm here with the one and only Dr. Jason Coleman. How are you, brother?
I'm good, man. I'm good. Hello, hello. Appreciate everybody listening to the last episode, and we definitely appreciate the support. How you feeling today, man?
Feeling pretty cool, man. It's to the end of the weekend, but get ready to get out there and save some lives at the beginning of the week tomorrow.
Always too short, right? Always too
Always,
short.
always. All right, man. So what we'll do, we'll get into it. But before we do, I wanted an article came across my desk a week or so ago. So I do apologize. I wanted to talk about it last week, but it just kind of slipped my mind after we got into our discussion. But what I wanted to do is highlight two HBCU schools, and of course, us being two proud HBCU alums, I always want to point out and highlight anytime any HBCU is doing good in our community. So. As
Definitely, definitely.
everyone is aware of, unfortunately, Texas recently, or the state of Texas, has recently been going through some really difficult times due to the recent winter storms that came through, and I wanted to highlight that during this time, and for people that aren't aware, we'll still want to continue to throw thoughts and prayers out to the residents of Texas. But throughout this winter storm, unfortunately, you had a lot of power outages, you had water shortages, you had people with no heat. Unfortunately, there were some casualties and people lost their lives just due to the record low temperatures out there. So, and amidst all the chaos, while a lot of the Texas politicians were blaming each other, and you had some other politicians that were taking inappropriate vacations to Mexico, um, we had a couple HBCUs that really stepped up. So I wanted to acknowledge Prairie View AM University and Texas Southern University. So while this
Definitely.
was taking place, while they were recovering from the storm, you had Prairie View and TSU. They both stepped up and they made food available for students and local residents. Prairie View actually went as far as turning a part of their campus into, I think, what they called a warming center, and they provided shelter to anyone in the city as well as their students. And so they were handing out water. They were serving food from at the like Chick-fil-A locations. So they really stepped up when the residents of those areas were in need. So I always want to highlight when our schools are doing good work in the community, because unfortunately, the general media and newspapers and television stations and so on and so forth only tend to focus on the negative that are happening in our community. So it's always really
Definitely.
important that we continue to highlight that. And especially because, when these natural disasters occur, whether it be either flooding or whether it's a hurricane or other different things that take place, our communities are hit first and they suffer the longest, right? Just due to a lack of resources. So this is, I have to big up and shout out, Prairie View and TSU for stepping up and doing their community first efforts, man. Because it's I can't it's great when we're the ones that are stepping in and helping out folks that unfortunately are less unfortunate. So shout out to them, to those two HBCUs.
Um, yeah, I mean, I think that's definitely a good article. Just in reviewing it, well, first and foremost, just this is Black History Month, so of course, highlighting our historically Black colleges and universities is important, and their contributions because that's not always recognized. So stand up to the real HU, and Cheney and all the rest, obviously all the rest of the HBCUs out there. But this was honestly an important article because again, I think that actions like this, especially when we look at like the climate that we in the United States, just as a whole, we really are in kind of the environment where people are kind of looking to take care of themselves and their own people.
Hmm.
So I think it kind of says a lot, about kind of the sentiment to which these schools approach this emergency, right? Because part of the problem, like with this larger pandemic and a lot of the issues that we're dealing with in America, and like our attitudes towards addressing those issues, is that, listen, if it doesn't affect our people, we don't really care, right?
Right.
That's kind of the mindset that a lot of us have gotten into, especially over the last 4 years. So I think it's good. One of the things, kind of in reading the article and doing a little bit more research, that I kind of liked about it was, they were also talking about opening the campus or whatever facilities to anybody in the community that also needed housing, right? So
Right.
I think that's an important thing, talking about warming centers and just general acts of, kindness, gratitude, whatever you want to call it, go a long way in terms of, the times that we're in, especially, and everybody could kind of use a hand right now. So, it's kind of like a feel good kind of story, but I think it's kind of fitting, especially on the last day of Black History Month, that we kind of, started out with that, but again, I just think it's a good thing. And I think definitely it's something that we should put on, especially at the beginning.
Yeah, absolutely. Their efforts can't be overstated. I definitely had a feeling of pride, just knowing that they stepped up in that capacity. So continue doing what you're doing down there in Prairie View and with Texas SU and to the state of Texas. Also, guys, and Dr. Jason and I, we don't see and hear everything. So if there are other things along with the comments and along with the feedback that we want you guys to provide us on, YouTube and on the Instagram and all the other different platforms, if there are other different, things of this nature or events that are taking place, guys, like let us know. So because we want to shout that out to any and everyone that's listening or watching. So absolutely. So kind of staying along with the college front, the topic I wanted us to get into next involves with how dealing or treating your mental health actually resulted in a huge financial burden for one student. And I
Yeah.
imagine this takes place, more often than not, especially on college campuses. So I'm gonna give you guys a rundown of what took place. So in this article that Jason and I got a chance to review, it was a 20-year-old freshman. She's from Mumbai, India, and she's attending Hofstra University, which is located in Hempstead, New York. She has a history of panic disorders and panic attacks. And in the midst of her arriving and moving in on campus, of course, during the pandemic, and dealing with the isolation that goes along with some of the protocols that a lot of schools have put in place, her anxiety started to elevate and balloon to like this extreme level when she found out that her family was having difficulty coming up with the tuition installment. And so, in true um, college university fashion, when the bill isn't rectified or your accountant isn't in good standing, she started receiving different notifications and then threats of
Right.
being removed off of campus and so on and so forth. So in an effort for her to try to cope with this level of stress and anxiety that she was experiencing, she made her way to the campus counseling center and she met with a psychologist. And per her account, all that she really wanted to take place was she just wanted someone to, you know, um, just kind of validate her experiences of what she's going through. And what she said is that when she mentioned suicidal thoughts, that the psychologist recommended that she receive a psychiatric evaluation. And so she went to one of the nearby hospitals, and that resulted in her staying 7 days on the inpatient psychiatric unit. And what she said, her time there was that she spent a lot of time alone. She received minimal therapy, and at the end of it, she received a bill for like $3,500.
Right.
So now we have an individual that was already stressed out about finances, and her anxiety is at an all-time high. And in the process of her trying to deal with the situation, she was hospitalized and she received another bill. So now you
Right.
have somebody that's dealing with two of the most costly bills that any American can receive, and that's coming from either a college or university or a hospital bill. So, just kind of reading through this article, and it also talks about how the situation was, the financial aspects of it. They talk about that also in the article. But, before we get to that, Jay, what was your thoughts regarding what you read?
Um, I mean, I kind of was looking at the bigger issue.
Hmm.
And to me, the bigger issue with this is, you go through the protocol, right? So people tell you, when you have a mental health issue, don't keep it to yourself. The whole spiel, right? There's probably brochures all over the college campus, right? Come to the college health center, call this number, blah blah blah, right? With well intention.
Hmm.
She calls the number, speaks to the psychologist. She ends up going to crisis. Is the short end of it. Ends up with a $3,500 bill. My issue with this is, does this discourage students on a larger level from using university services, right? Yes, it does,
Hmm.
right? Again, we're gonna get into I mean, maybe we'll talk about the insurance part of it now or later, but I think a big part of it too was she also said she purchased insurance through the school, right? So she's following school protocol, purchases her insurance through the school, ends
Hmm.
up with a $3,000 balance.
Right.
You know, again, I, I'm not in hospital administration, so we're not here to debate that. But this doesn't pass the smell test on the surface, right? In terms of what we are saying out of our mouth, what we want our young people to do in terms of seeking services, and then handing them a $4,000 bill. You know, um, these type of situations have to be handled, a different way. So just starting from the beginning, again, it doesn't pass the smell test. This is a person who had, a lifelong kind of chronic history with anxiety. So again, um, for somebody to come away from that situation with no with feeling like they weren't helped at all and with a bill, I think it discourages students as a whole from using these services.
Yeah, this is the probably like the worst nightmare that someone can envision. Like you said, someone trying to get help. It's This really personifies that, adding injury to insult, or insult to injury, because it's like you have someone who's like, you know what, I'm probably never gonna go through this process again, right? Just
Right.
even just thinking about it, and a lot of what this student went through resonates with me, even on a personal level, just for the reason that I have a child that's in her freshman year of college. And what kept coming up for me was just kind of thinking, like, what if this was her, right? She's already thinking about, and you're already dreading, and you're constantly worrying about financial issues. And now all of a sudden, when trying to, like you said, follow the protocol, get what's supposed to be done, or get the treatment to help you manage these issues, it's almost like you're being punished, unfortunately.
Right.
And yeah, you like, that's gonna discourage her. Like, that's gonna, I'm sure that this has happened to a number of college students that are trying to go about it the right way. And it's unfortunate. And absolutely, like, there's definitely something awry here regarding this system, and how, you know, this, the way this came out financially, right? Especially with the insurance is only taking a certain portion of,
Right.
and it's like you're gonna leave a college student with this hefty bill, right? After seeking emergency services. And so, like, no, this is like, no, I'm sure there are ways, again, that this should have been able to prevent this, but there's definitely something wrong with this picture.
And bro, like think about it on just like a practical level, right? Um, think about when this gets around, or just people hear about this type of situation. You're gonna have kids feeling like they're in a situation where, do I want to go get mental health services, or do I want to give my parents another burden of a bill? A lot of people that go to college, their parents are helping them. They got FAFSA, those type of things. So, I mean, again, it's one thing. First of all, I don't even think it's fair to debate whether you want to put your meal card on your loans, right? Like food
Right.
should be free.
Right.
You know what I mean? But it's one thing to be sitting around debating about whether you want to get the full meal plan or half, or make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, right? It's
Hmm.
another thing whether you want to debate about whether to address these suicidal thoughts or depressive symptoms or symptoms of anxiety, especially when we're talking about which could be the most anxiety anxiety provoking period of some of these people's lives, right? We're talking about their first time away from home, some of their first time balancing schedules, balancing money, you know, considering life choices, you know, serious relationships, all of those things, right? And we're telling them we got services for you, but with a caveat, right? You know, and the caveat is a $4,000 bill. No, thank you. That's what most of them are going to say, right?
Mm-hmm.
I would assume, and you're going to have a large portion of people that are either going to self-medicate. You know, we're on college campus, right?
Right.
Or they're going to just talk to a friend, um, and not saying, you know, that the friend might not be well intentioned, but it might not be the best advice, right? So I think we create a situation where, um, you know, we're putting our young people in a difficult situation, you know, and a dangerous situation. You know, we want them to be able to access services without fear, you know, of retribution, even if that's in the form of a bill. You know, as ridiculous as it may sound to some people who might hear that, um, with the things that we waste money on, you know, those type of services, if you, especially if you can't pay for them, should be covered, you know.
Oh, absolutely. Like, especially this day and age, like things, information and bad experiences get out. Right. Like if
Right.
someone has a bad experience, not just at a hospital, but you have a bad experience at a Wendy's, like, listen, this
Well,
is,
you see on Twitter,
no,
yeah.
no, it's going out. So
Word.
absolutely. So when this gets out, like you said, this is going to discourage other people. Like, oh, and you mentioned one, we're already dealing with the pandemic, right? So that's an additional, layer of stress and isolation that a lot of students are dealing with. So, like you said, these people are either going to self-medicate, they're going to get not so great or maybe helpful advice, or they're going to continue to isolate. They're going to sit and stew in their room, and things are going to continue to get worse, right? Their symptoms are going to continue to, manifest into even more extreme symptoms. And so it's like,
Yeah.
well, I'm not going to go there because this is what the end result is. They're not even going to be thinking about their health. Their priority is going to be finances. I don't want to pay this
Right.
bill despite how well I'm not feeling or how, my anxiety is ballooning up. So it's really unfortunate. And you also have to take a look at the insurance element, and then also the hospital element, because even reading further into the article, right there, the hospitals and these insurances are supposed to put something in place where they're just like, hey, you know we have policies where it's like, hey, if you do have to be hospitalized, you're eligible for a reduced or will help you or assist you in eliminating that cost of it. But of course,
Right.
and I know they're going to be very discreet in promoting that information, because
Right.
they want you to take
Very,
on that
very
bill.
discreet.
Right, exactly. Like they'll put maybe like a number there that says, "Oh, for this, call this number for financial assistance," but they're not going to flat out tell you, "Hey, you know what? For getting your bill reduced or possibly even eliminated, given your financial circumstances, you know, give this department a call." Which is really
Right.
unfortunate, because like there are ways where they could, be more intuitive or even counteract this issue, right? This way that people are discouraging it, but they're choosing not to, and it's really unfortunate. And like you said, this is going to affect a lot of students' lives. And we already know between 14 and 25, you have, like, this is a very delicate and tough area, for kids, right? Between 14 and 25, you have a lot of kids that they're going to experience, probably their first bout of some type of mental health episode, right? Whether it be anxiety, whether it be depression, whether it be whatever, right? Because so many different things take place between that age. And so now you have a specific, age demographic, people that are going to need these services, and you're going to, like you said, catch 22 and say, hey, if you get these services, we
Come on
got you.
in.
Come on in.
Right.
you know. And so, and I had to also think about probably how frightening that experience was, her going on an inpatient unit. And I'm not going to call into question what the clinician, why he recommended, because again, we have to be
Yeah.
really careful, especially if someone does mention suicidal thoughts and the content to which that's made it, because Suicide, unfortunately, among that same population is the second leading cause of death, right? Among those that age group. So, but I can only
Right.
imagine also just thinking about when she probably went on that psychiatric unit, she's also probably with other adults that are suffering severe mental health issues, right? As opposed
Right.
to she probably just needed or was recommended for an acute hospitalization. So you have so many different layers of trauma that this individual or individuals are going through when this takes place, right? You already got the initial mental health issue with the anxiety. Now you're going to tell her, you're going to put her in an environment which she, may or may not need, in the scary environment. So that's one trauma. And then you're going to hit her with a bill on the way out, be like, oh yeah, by the way. So now she's two things to worry about: her bill, and she hasn't even resolved the issue of the original, you know, tuition situation.
Yeah, it's just, I mean, let's, that's one of the reasons why I wanted to kind of touch on this one because, it just seems like it doesn't pass the smell test, I mean, again, who knows if there's more information beneath the surface, but definitely seems like one that need deserves like a second look, in terms of the policy part of it.
Yeah, the best thing that I can think of is for people that have family members, that have kids, or that are listening or watching, that have that maybe you have kids that are in college or maybe getting ready to go to college. It's a process, right? In the same way how when we go through the fast food process of trying to see who's going to give us the best financial reward, I think it's also important to once, if you're a parent or you're a student, and when you're looking into the different health insurance, because that's going to come up when you get in your packet and things, is looking at, okay, you know what does this insurance entail, right? If I am
Right.
hospitalized, like when you're going through, what's the best insurance to take? That is really something for people and parents and students to review, right? So this kind of information going into it, because like we said, the best thing that we have as far as our control is that information, right? So you can make the best informed decision. So at least, I'm sure she was shocked as hell when she saw that, oh, Aetna's supposed to take care of this, so this is what I got. So absolutely asking those questions, and you are well within your right as any member of any insurance company. Like, you're the member, so you have every right to, before these situations take place, is calling your insurance companies and say, hey, if this happens, what am I looking at, right? Not to discourage me, but what are my options? I think trying to get as much information as possible could hopefully maybe alleviate that, some of that, reluctance to go if you feel like you're going to be punished.
I mean, the only thing I would add to that is, especially parents and families that know that they have kids who have mental health diagnoses, right, that are going to college, right? Because there's going to be a lot, there's a lot of these kids on college campuses are going to arrive there and they already have been in mental health treatment. They already are prescribed psychotropic medications. They're already in therapy. So you got to pre-plan, you know.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, again, not saying you want to catastrophize and, you know, think that your child is going to have an emergency, but you want to plan for that worst day, right? Because those people, you're not going to necessarily be in a close proximity, or they might not necessarily be near to the providers that they're used to accessing when they're in crisis, right? So you want to actually explore those options, whether it be in the area or you want to consider that when you're considering places, for education for these kids, those are big things that you want to consider, right? Because mental health is just like physical, is just as important as physical health, right? So
Mm-hmm.
if you had, a medical condition, and you knew that the best treatment was in New York and you're from New York, that you're most likely going to look for a school in New York, right?
Right.
So the same thing goes with mental health. So if you have, a good treatment provider or a place that you're comfortable being treated, or a person that you have a good relationship with, then you want to consider that when you look at things like schools, right? You want to consider, if you do go into crisis, how far away are you from that person or from your resources? So that's all I would kind of add on to what you're saying.
No, you're absolutely right. Because and I have to be honest, because even going on college tours as recently as a year or two ago, the main question that I always asked was, oh, do you guys have a college counseling center and who's on staff? I'm going down those lines. But I have to be honest, even being a clinician myself, I'm not thinking about that, right? I'm not thinking about like, oh, the insurance aspects of it, right? I'm just thinking like, okay, it's in a major city, so at least I know she'll have some hospitals available, or I know that, okay, they have some services available if she needs it. But as a parent, that doesn't come up. So I'm happy you mentioned that, because that needs to go in the checklist. Like, is your insurance going to be covered? Are they in and out of network? Because that makes a big difference also, right? And not to say that you want to put a price tag on health by any means. However, you don't want to be in a situation, you want to at least try to lessen that probability of you being, if your kid does have to be hospitalized or seek any type of medical help and by any means, that you're not going to be now dealing with this on the other end, after getting treatment. So I'm happy you
Yeah.
mentioned that, because that's something that parents and everybody need to add to that list of that checkoff list when you're looking at schools.
It's a fact, man. Like, we plan for financial emergencies, we plan for medical emergencies if necessary, but we don't plan for mental health. So that's
Absolutely.
all I would say.
All right. All right. So last week, we talked about hip hop and mental health, and how they're infusing the lyrics into into their albums, into their music, which is great. We're starting to see a growing trend with that. And so something that's also connected with hip hop is sports, right? They're pretty much synonymous. They go hand in hand with each other. And so that's also something we wanted to bring to the forefront. Today's episode is the connection of mental health and in sports, in professional sports, even more specifically. So you came across some articles that jumped off page for you. What was something, or one of those articles that you threw out there?
Well, first one we were talking about was kind of talking about Paul George, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of a big story because a lot of people were fascinated, as myself, with the bubble last year, because that was the first time we had kind of ever seen that type of setup. And there was a lot of talk beforehand about number one, about the players that opted out, but that's kind of not the topic for tonight. But talking about the players that stayed and opted in, how it was going to impact them, and Paul George kind of takes center stage because he was one of the players that his performance was definitely impacted. And after the season, he kind of came out and talked about how he was dealing with some anxiety and some depression, right? And I mean, the reaction was extraordinary, right? I mean, from
Mm-hmm.
Twitter to radio stations to even his own kind of um, comrades, for lack of a better term, that playing basketball players. There wasn't a lot of support. There was some. I'm not saying there wasn't none, but there wasn't a lot of support. So that you had people giving him that nickname, Pandemic P. Overall, just implying that there was weakness associated with him experiencing those symptoms, of course, which we know is not true, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I kind of just think it kind of highlights it. We go back to stigma a lot, right? And it highlights the stigma that's associated with, us as Black males, especially, you know, um, acknowledging that we do experience mental health problems, right? So now, mind you, this is 2020, right? So we've seen all of the PSAs, right? We
Mm-hmm.
LeBron James is already doing the calm commercial, right?
Right.
The best player in the world, in my opinion, right? um, we've already done all of the psychoeducation, right? But you still have Charles Barkley saying, "We rich, we never in a dark place," right? So that attitude or lack of insight, or that attitude that your money insulates you, from experiencing, mental health, deficits, is still around, right? Or that aura or that bravado that if you are a Black male, and especially a Black male that's powerful, you can't show that side of you or any type of weakness. So of course, I went right there, kind of, and took that from it. um but again, it's just another example, of the lack of insight that some people have, right? And I mean, because listen, Charles Barkley, he's an intelligent person. So, um, and do I, again, I don't know what role he was operating in, right? I don't know if he was
Right. Right.
entertaining, or if that or if that's what he
Does
really
his
meant. But either way, what we talk about is, when you're in these positions of a certain amount of stature, right? There's a certain amount of responsibility that comes along with what you say, right? So that part has to own. And that part, in my humble opinion, seems irresponsible because, obviously we know, that just because an individual has a lot of financial resources doesn't mean that they don't experience, sadness, depression, and all the other things. So what did you get out of that though?
Um, for me, I think you touched on something really important. Is that unfortunately these athletes, men and women, that you know, when they have like these financial resources, because the first thing, unfortunately, a lot of the general public tends to look at is, oh, well, he's making X, Y amount of dollars. He's a millionaire. He should be like kind of similar sentiments that Barkley mentioned. You know,
Right.
a result, or I would say a lack of empathy, gets thrown their way, right? It's showed upon athletes because they have these resources. It's like, oh, well, they should be able to withstand all of these other different pressures and all these other different issues and stressors that are getting thrown their way, right? Because if we're taking a look at just the bubble by itself, right, you have to take a look at it and take a step back and say, like, these individuals are away from their families, right? A lot of them for a good 2 months are away from their families. And even though you had people saying, oh, well, they take long road trips and so they're away from their families all the time. No, that's completely different than being away from your family 2 months at a time, right? And so, you know, I think you have to kind of take a look at yourself, right? And really put yourself in their shoes and say, like, well, how would you feel being away from your loved ones, right? Because you can't take everybody to the bubble. You can't bring everybody. And so
And the
you're
longer the longer you win, the longer you away.
exactly. So you're taking someone and you're putting them pretty much out of their comfort zone. You're putting them in a hotel with maybe selected individuals that they may be able to be with. But either way, they're away from the majority of their loved ones. And then now you're asking them, one, to abide by all of these different protocols because of COVID. And there's still a lack of information about COVID, about the strand, about all these other different symptoms and how you can be affected by it and things of that nature. And then you're asking these individuals to actually go out and play, right? And now you're thinking that, oh, well, what's happening in the real world is not affecting them, but it's affecting us, right? It's affecting us in our everyday job, and you're going to expect it not to affect them. um I felt really bad for Paul George. Truth be told, my brother is a Clippers fan. He's like one of the only Clippers fans in Philadelphia, but he's been riding with them for a long time. So he's a big
Yeah.
Paul George fan. I'm a Paul George fan even from when he was playing in Indiana. And for him to actually one go through that, and then I felt like it was really courageous of him to even come out and talk about that, right? He actually came out and said, "Yeah, this bubble is not. I'm not doing well." Right. So for him to actually
Right.
step out and say, like, "Hey, I'm not doing well. I'm in a dark place right now." Right. I believe he actually sought treatment from like a
Right.
psychologist or a psychiatrist during the course of
Yeah,
that
the team, it
series.
was like a team psychiatrist.
Right. And so, like, for me, I felt like that was really courageous. That was really brave because, again, he's already there. These players are bringing something already into their workplace, right? They're bringing something, they're bringing this emotional stress into the workplace. And then we're expecting them to perform at a really high level, like to be able to block all that out and just do your job. Where you have in irregular circumstances, right? You have some people that aren't even going to work because either they can't because of the protocols or that they're going in a very, you know, specialized situation where different things are being protocols and things are being put in place. So, like you said, I felt like a lot of those comments being displayed to him were irresponsible. It was actually shocking to find out. I was reading the article, and he said that he has been receiving even more trash talk like this year. Right? He
Right.
said that people
Now,
are
now
coming at him even harder. Right?
that's that's the part of it. Like, so think about it. Like in reality, this is where stigma comes back. And I mean, we're making a little light of it, because we're just having a conversation. But they're taking that and
Hmm.
using it against him and coming at his neck on the court.
Right.
You know what I mean? So I mean, listen, Raja Bell said, keep it to yourself, right? So
Hmm.
listen, it goes back to stigma, right? And I gotta also, raise the point of, again, I don't know if this is the case, but we know, in our communities of color, especially with males, there is that increased pressure, to have to throw that guard up, right? And this
Right.
does not help, right? And what I will say is, what does it say about us, especially us Black males, when you have the people that are in the highest positions of power who are still that insecure, right? Charles Barkley is still that insecure.
Right.
That's the major problem. Raja Bell, he's made it to the highest level of being an NBA player, highest level of basketball you could ever make. I'm sure I don't know if he's a millionaire, but I'm sure he's wealthy. He's made a lot of money, you know, but that's his response, right? Keep it to yourself, right? So his idea of manhood is tied up in, whatever front that he chooses to put up, right? To project himself in a certain way. And that's fine. Again, I don't know him. We're talking about this one comment, right? But we're talking about how it fits into the overall stigma of mental health, especially with Black males, right? And that is a part of the problem, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, Again, that's why it's so important that we have people like LeBron James, people like Brandon Marshall, who are that large of a figure and are willing to say, I have had these challenges, right? Because if Raja Bell and Charles Barkley are shaming people, for dealing with their mental health out in the open, and they're the people that we admire, or not, I mean, not me, but these children, some of these children admire, you know, um, then where does that leave them? You know what I mean? All of us, whether we acknowledge it or not, we look at people who we either admire or people who are in positions of power for leadership, right?
Mm-hmm.
That is why it was so important, and we don't want to kind of switch gears, but that's why you see the push to have people of power and influence taking these vaccines, right? Because it sends a powerful message when you have people who are well respected and trusted, saying something, and it also sends a powerful message when they don't say something. So again, uh, these are like select comments, and I don't know what they're dealing with in their personal lives or what motivated those comments. I don't know if they're just a section of what they said, but when we talk about how it contributes to the overall stigma, this is why people keep their issues to themselves, right?
Yeah, I mean, it unfortunately maintains that status quo of the stigma. And you said something really important is right, what's going on in their personal life. Like, I feel like the bubble just really highlighted some of the struggles that some athletes were already experiencing. Right. So it's not like the bubble was an additional layer, additional stress that players had to play through and had to take into consideration. But then you have other players that were already dealing with things, right? And that's something again I feel like the general public or we as sports fans tend to forget. Like we like a lot of these players have lives, they have families, they have they have issues and different things that they're going through, and then again we were
Right.
expecting them to come through. Like you mentioned the Charles Haley article, and reading through that, like I didn't even know that his daughter had leukemia, right? But we still expected him to go out and play, right? So he had some mental health issues even as a child,
Right.
and now he's played through that, right? He's gotten himself to a point where he's become one of the best athletes in the world, and then you're expecting him still where he has these personal issues and things going on, because if you have a child that's experiencing especially a severe medical issue such as that, and I don't know Charles Haley, but I can only imagine what he's going through, what the anxiety, depression, the lack of control that
Right.
he experiences as he's growing through those channels with him and his family. But then we
Right.
expect him to go out and play, and like you said, they're not going to come out and tell anybody about this because they don't want to be looked at, like you said, as a charity case. They don't want to be a burden. And that word that always comes up, I don't want to be looked at as weak. Like it
Right.
always seemed like the only time you saw a league or you saw like other players tend to kind of come out and support other players that was anything remotely close to like a mental health issue was if somebody passed away, right? So if you had a
Right.
player and one of their parents or a family member passed away, then you saw the outpouring of support and saying, oh, people are
I mean,
reaching out to the different things. But it was still a point where it's like, oh, we need this person to go out and play. And then it's like things are supposed to go back to normal.
That's
So, you know,
I think that's how we approach most things though, right? Like we can be retroactively empathic, right?
right.
So it's like when somebody dies, then, of course, we care about mental health and suicide prevention and all of those things, you know. But, we kind of, not we, but some people look at that person as like a burden and weak and all of those other things when they're, for lack of a better term, crying out for some assistance with their behavior, right?
Hmm.
Um, so again, I mean, as you were talking and as I was reading the article, I was just thinking about all of those things, right? Like if your child has a medical issue or a mental health disorder, to a certain extent, like you're going through that with your child, right? So his daughter going through her medical issues, he's dealing with leukemia, history of suicidal ideation, and then you're dealing with the pressures of the NFL, right?
Right.
Um, and I don't know what his background is, but you know, even if everything in your life was reasonably stable, then you have to deal with your family members and who's not financially stable and who wants something and all of those other things,
Right.
right? So just to kind of mix all of that up in a bowl, it just kind of gives us a glimpse of just what we don't know about these people, right? That we put up on these pedestals and we follow and we scrutinize their every move, right?
Mhm.
One of these NFL players, if they go into a McDonald's and they order a meal and they have an attitude, it's on TMZ, right? And we're wondering what's wrong with them. But all of these things we don't consider, but they're in the fishbowl. So, reading this article, it kind of balanced, me out, right? Because again, like we're talking about him now, right? So if you're a famous person, your life is opened up, but just kind of reading this, that's kind of where my mind went, is the fact that sometimes we got to consider these people and kind of consider more of like a whole approach in terms of looking at all of the parts of their lives instead of what is kind of just coming across the screen at the moment.
Right. Because
Whether that's possible, I don't know.
I think it also, I think I'm hoping that conversations such as this actually kind of create that perspective in people where when you do see an athlete and they have like this incident maybe out in public where they have, and I'm not condoning anytime an athlete breaks the law or anything, but when you start to see like any type of bizarre behavior, it's as opposed to being like, yo, what's wrong with dude? Like, yo, he got all this money, he doing it, he throwing it away. Maybe it's also thinking about, well, what happened to him? Like, what's he going through? Right? Because a lot of times when these situations start to take place, you're seeing somebody unravel. They're experiencing some type of mental health episode, which is usually a bigger picture of something else, right? It's always like those spokes on the wheel are leading to that center. So what we see is like the anger, right? The lashing out. Like Charles Haley mentioned that. He mentioned that, yeah, I had a lot of aggression that that took place that I put out on the field that served him well because of his sport of choice, but it was like also due to his traumatic childhood, things that he went through. So when you started to see his incidents, and I remember him getting into some legal issues and things, during that course of time during his playing years, but it's also maybe people can start to take a step back and be like, oh, well, this explains it, right? It doesn't condone it, but now we're starting to take a look. Like you said, they're in a fishbowl. They have all these other different things that they're going through like normal people, right? We all have these issues. We have these ups and downs in our lives and these all these different stressors, but we're not being, looked at every day, right? We don't have that job. And we also are not in a position where we're being criticized for our job, right? I mean, could you imagine, doing your job and then when you leave out, you clock out for the day, you're getting a million, you have talk shows and sports radio and things talking about you, talking about how bad you did your job and what you could
Right,
have did worse, right? And
right,
we still expect that individual to like be immune to it. And no, that's not
right,
the way it works. It's, maybe after years of dealing and being in that arena or that profession, they've learned how to deal with it better. But by no means, would you want somebody coming to your job telling you how bad you did, what you could improve, whether you should get fired or not, right? All these other different things, but we are replacing it on this athlete. And again, these athletes have been through traumatic issues just like anybody else, right? They're no
right,
different. A lot of them are coming from some really marginalized backgrounds and lower SES neighborhoods. And, they're outliers, right? The ones that made it, they're outliers that have made it to this particular,
Yeah, that's a
status
fact.
level of their sport and being the best that they do. But we're still expecting them to, like, conduct themselves and doing, and again, not condoning any of the behavior that's taking place of anybody getting hurt or anything of that nature. But I think it should at least serve as a point of enlightenment of, like, these folks, these individuals are going through things and they're bringing it with them. And like you said, if they're not getting the help because, again, they're stepping back and they're like, yo, I don't want to take that chance of, not getting drafted or being cut from the team because the organization is not in full support of, these health issues that I'm experiencing. Now they're going to continue to take that in, not get help. And we all know what happens when, untreated mental health takes place. I don't care whether you're a regular person or you're an athlete. Like, your circumstances are going to get worse and things are going to start to unravel around you. So, while we're expecting any more from them, it's really unfortunate that we're kind of putting that magnify in that spotlight on them and expecting them to fare better, especially given they're possibly in an environment, like you said, where that stigma is alive and well. All right.
Right.
So it's like
Right.
we have to also take in consideration that these individuals have taken in a huge sacrifice just to get where they are, right? A lot of them have given up their normal childhoods because they're working out and they're going to AAU, they're doing all these other different things, all this like pressure moments all throughout the majority of their life. And of course, some people can sit here and say, well, they chose to do that, but we all chose to be good in our profession, right? Whether it's going to school for a number of years so you can be the best at your profession, or you're striving to become the best bank teller or bank manager, or you're striving to become the best star quarterback. Like, we all sacrifice, and so
Right.
that comes along with a lot of different stressors. So a lot of these athletes are bringing also things in with them. It's not like these things are just they get to the league and they just take place. But no, it's they're bringing a lot of baggage. They're bringing a lot of these health issues, and unfortunately, like you said, because of the stigma, it's discouraging them from getting that treatment.
No, I agree, man. Again, like I definitely think it's an important topic, and definitely ties right into the stigma. I was talking about stigma today. Um, you know, so I think those fit right in.
What I would
Definitely.
like to see, I'm happy that, like you said, you got LeBron doing like the calm. You got a lot of different players that are doing the PSAs, and the leagues and things are starting to get on board, because I know there was a time even the NBA were like getting into like these circumstances with a lot of different players who actually did speak out against it, and they weren't as like as supportive with dealing with athletes that were suffering from mental health. And the article with my guy from the Colts, who was talking about his issues with experiencing anxiety and depression, is that like this, I think it's something, and I'm hoping that the league starts to get more supportive but become more proactive, because like you mentioned, it's a lot of times it's retroactive, right? We're reacting to an event that
Mhm.
takes place to a person that's obviously experiencing some type of a mental health crisis. However, like, I think the best way to try to lower that stigma is if the league is like, when you come into the league, when you get drafted, in addition to them going through like, okay, the medical aspect, right, you got to go through your physical. And I think the closest that they used to come is like the to like mental health, or like a psychologist, was like them assessing or facilitating like the Wonderlic test, right? It's
Yeah.
also like, listen, like what's going on with you emotionally, mental health wise, right? How
Right.
about, I'm hoping that they start to incorporate those batteries of those self-report assessments, and saying like, hey, if you're experiencing this, we have these services. Like, we have a guy on the team. We have these
But
clinicians that, so you're getting it at the ground level, as opposed to, you know, when something happens. I mean, it would behoove, just looking at it from like a business standpoint. Like, if I'm an organization, if I'm a $1 billion team, I want my players to be as best as possible. I want them to be in the tightest of health. So it's like, let me check, even when they're coming in, like, I know this kid is going through shit, right? This kid is
yeah,
has gone through, come from the hood. It would make sense, I mean, in a perfect world, to be like, listen, you're going through these other different things. You've experienced it. We have someone that can help you through that if you choose to. And so hopefully, you know what I mean? I think that would hopefully like lessen the stigma, but you
I
know,
mean, the only reason why I would push back on that is because the reality is you got people, a lot of people who are coming from humble beginnings and trying to feed their family, and
mhm,
you're asking them, you're asking them to show vulnerability in the last step. So I work, I go through AAU, I go through Pop Warner, I make it to college without hurting myself. I make
right.
it to the I make it to the interview for the New York Giants, and now I'm gonna tell you I got anxiety. Hell no. Now I listen. It may sound bad coming from me as a doctor, but let's be very
No, we gotta
honest.
be real. We gotta be real.
You get to your doctoral interview, and they say, "What is your greatest vulnerability?" What are you gonna say besides "I work too hard"? I work too hard. You ain't gonna say that. That's what you're gonna say,
Yeah, you gotta
right?
play the
Because
game.
you got to play the game. So again, I think it comes back to right. The truth is probably somewhere in the middle. So it comes back to creating an environment where people don't feel like that is going to be held against them. You know what I mean? Now,
Right.
owners are owners. They businessmen. So if you could be the best tight end, the best wide receiver in the world, but if that doctor sends a message up the line like, yeah, 88 is the best, but we might not be able to put to depend on him, boss. Guess what? Guess what's gonna happen? He ain't gonna be on the team.
Mhm.
so so you right, but we gotta consider, both parts of it, right? That's why, and I'm not saying you don't recognize this, of course you do, but that's why HIPAA and all of that is with certain things is going to be kept far away from that business
Mhm.
negotiation, because when we start conflating those things, then the businessman is going to make a business decision. You know what I mean?
Right.
Me and you, we we're going to be wanting to put services around somebody and give them the support. Not to make light of it, but a business person going to make a business decision. So I think we got to kind of look at it from both sides. So you know
No,
how
you're
it
right.
is. That's how you end up with like player reps, and the coaches have their reps, right? And all of those representatives and advocating for their side, right? Because it kind of becomes hard to be unbiased at that particular point. If you're the owner, the players, for lack of a better term, are your product, you know, um, and if you think that something is going to cause one of the players not to perform optimally, you're going to make a business decision. So I don't know. It's a convoluted, conversation, but again, it comes down to again stigma, right, of mental health and how comfortable a person is going to be kind of talking about their diagnoses in the workplace, depending on how it's going to affect their marketability, their productivity, or whatever.
Yeah, I have to admit, like I'm like the best way, outside of information, but one of the best ways to combat and lower that stigma is when you have current players, right? Like you said, you have the Paul George, and I'm really hoping that he does well
Hmm.
this season because he came back strong, and he's been very vocal about the that he's seeing that he gets treatment for anxiety, his depression, that his support system has been coming in. So I'm hoping that he comes back strong, and he has been so far. And I think that'll be the best, model where you have successful players like you have LeBron and you have other players like Paul George that says, "Hey, I was experiencing this, but I'm still on top of my game. In fact, it's been helpful in my performance, just like you mentioned." And I think that's the best thing as a, not to say that the Brandon Marshalls and the Charles Haleys and all the other different athletes that have already retired and are still closely, associated with the game. However, when you have a player that's currently playing, that's dominating, that's still relevant in playing, I feel like when those are the ones that are talking about it, that's where the message becomes even stronger, right? And it's just like, listen, your people are going to talk, they're going to, and still going to have some of these views, but I'm doing well with my treatment. So I'm personally rooting for him. I'm hoping he does well. Um, we'll continue to see and monitor and watch. And, I think this is definitely going to be a topic that we're going to continue to talk about because it's evolving, right? It's a continuing, it's an ongoing conversation. And, you know, with the advances in mental health, I'm hoping that some of the organizations do start to pick up on some of these initiatives and some of these endeavors that it can get applied to some of the players out there. So we'll continue to see, but yeah, definitely it's a lot of layers to unpack with this.
Definitely.
All right. So before we get out of here, anything you wanted to add?
Just because it's Black History Month, I just wanted to kind of make a note to my inspirational psychologists, Kenneth and Mamie Clark, who was responsible for that black doll experiment.
Mhm.
Anybody who's not aware of that, please do your research. Um, Again, I just wanted to give them credit before tomorrow and before the month runs out. You know what I mean? But seriously, they are my inspirations in terms of why I'm in this field. So again, Kenneth and Mamie Clark, check them out if you're not aware of their work.
All right, absolutely. That's definitely shout out to all the pioneers, because we got to pay it forward. It's one of the reasons why you and I do this podcast is one, we're trying to get the information out to the general public because it's important. The more information you have, the better decision you're going to make, and information is power. However, it's always good to recognize those that came before us, right? The same way how we're trying to serve as models for, little kids that look like us and say, hey, you know what? I can do that. I can get that DR period before my name. It's important that we look at the trailblazers that came before because, as you know, even still, it's not we're still in the minority as far as being black males in that are psychologists. But even thinking back then of what it was looking like, the numbers were even lower. And so where you have an individual like you just named that was so imperative in that particular experiment and all the research that individual did, we have to recognize it, right? It's important that we definitely, you know, acknowledge and highlight and spotlight those individuals that came before us and made it, you know, I'm even going to use the word cool, right? It made it cool to be a psychologist, right? It made it really cool to be like, hey, you know what? I'm going to talk about the brain. I'm going to counsel people. I want to do research
Mhm.
because you have someone that you can look to that look just like us that was able to do it. So, absolutely want to continue to highlight that even
Don't
throughout the
don't
rest of the
discount
year.
yourself. Don't discount yourself, man. You making it cool to be a psychologist too.
Hey man, listen,
Uh,
you know what we do? We out here saving lives, man. You and I both. This is how we do things, So we gonna save lives and we gonna look good doing it. So
that's a fact. I agree with you on that one, bro.
you know
That's a fact. That's a fact.
so we appreciate everybody checking in and watching and listening.
Definitely.
So like we mentioned earlier, please feel free to hit the like, subscribe, provide feedback, guys. We definitely want to hear from you. We want to talk about things that are relevant to what you have going on in your life. So definitely feel free to definitely put things in the comment box, like, subscribe, all that good stuff on all of our platforms, on YouTube, on Instagram. So be on the lookout for all of those pages coming through, in addition to myself and Jason's individual pages. We appreciate everybody tuning in and listening. Everybody have a great week. Wish you the best mental health, and we'll see you again next week, guys. Appreciate everybody tuning in and listening.
Later.
Signing off. All right, Jay.
Later.